Thank you very much. I move second reading of Bill 187, an act to establish a commission of inquiry into accessible parking in municipalities.
Mrs. Martow has moved second reading of Bill 187, an act to establish a commission of inquiry into accessible parking in municipalities pursuant to Standing Order 98. The member has 12 minutes for a presentation.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just want to comment on some amazing people who made the effort to come out today, and when you see them up in the galleries, some people had to have a little bit of help climbing some of the stairs. Some people have scooters, some people have wheelchairs, some people have lots of friends with them. I just want to mention first Paige Zalden and her mum, Michelle. And Paige was really the spearhead for this because about 5 years ago, her mum, Michelle, got a parking ticket in Vaughan for parking where you're allowed to park in Toronto, and assumed that in Vaughan, in the municipality just bordering Toronto, that it was the same parking rules. And luckily she didn't have to pay the ticket, I believe, because she found some kind of error in the license plate number or the date. But Michelle is also involved with the UJA Accessible Committee, which is called Itanu. And we also have Peter Athanasolopoulos from Spinal Cord Injury. He's the Senior Manager of Public Policy and Government Relations. We have Louise Russo, and now a lot of you may recognize the name of Louise because she's a bit of a hero for a lot of people. Not just because she was injured in basically a mafia shootout, but because of her advocacy work and her braveness in the face of what she went through. And she has founded WAVE, Working Against Violence Every Day, which I'm sure keeps her busy with all of her advocacy work, and we all appreciate everything she's doing. Wendy Murphy with spinal cord injuries here as well, and she's a former reporter for City TV, if anybody recognizes her name. Linda Staples, also with spinal cord injury. Eddie Rice is the chairman of the Ontarians with Disabilities of B'nai B'rith. And I'm not sure if he's here yet, but Patrick Bram from RENA, which is for people with disabilities in basically in the Jewish community. It's a bit of a very well-known organization in my riding. Stuart Kiff, I'm just going to say my friend Stuart Kiff, who's here because he has so many different jobs that he does. Dr. Iris Kulbatsky, and I went to a fantastic show of wheel dance, which is wheelchairs and able-bodied people who dance with them, and she's executive director of the organization. I also just want to mention quickly David Lepovsky, who's chair of AODA Alliance, who sent me lots of notice, but regretfully he couldn't be here today. He's a lawyer and a professor at York University. Well, I want to borrow a line from my colleague, the member from York Simcoe, and she's going to be speaking on this as well. And basically what she said is accessible parking needs to be accessible. And that's what we're speaking about here today. That right now we have parking rules that are set by municipalities in the best interest of the people who live in those municipalities, Madam Speaker. But the problem is that people have enough challenges if they're dealing with mobility challenges of any type, whether it's visible or not visible, that they shouldn't be carrying around a stack of papers dealing with the different rules for different municipalities. So I'm not suggesting that we should order municipalities how to set their parking rules. I'm just suggesting that we need to sit down, all the accessible groups, some of which are represented here and some of which might be watching at home, but sit down and have those discussions with the municipalities, how best to streamline and where possible have as much the same rules, and if the rules aren't the same, to maybe have a system of posting it so that people will know, because it shouldn't be south of Steeles or north of Steeles that the rules are so vastly different, in my opinion. And hopefully people here are agreeing. The other part of the coin is the permits. Well, we are seeing now with the blitz from Toronto Police that went on earlier this year that close to half of the permits seem to be either counterfeit permits, being used fraudulently, And the system definitely needs some tightening up, because there's a serious problem, Madam Speaker, when people are trying to get somewhere, and it's not easy, I'm sure, for them to get into their vehicle or their friends' or relatives' vehicle. It's hard enough to get into the vehicle themselves without arriving somewhere and not being able to find parking. These are not patients. These are not sick people. These are people who want their independence, deserve their independence, who deserve our compassion and our help, but not our pity. You know, we used to say disabled parking, and I think that it's hard sometimes to make that change. But words are very powerful, and there's a lot to be said for changing some of the terminology that we use every day. And I wouldn't punish somebody for saying disabled parking or handicap parking, but we all have to put our heads around the fact that it's not about sickness, it's about accessibility and having everybody in the community be part of that community. I just want to mention that the Toronto exemptions, in case people don't know, are that basically some of them are, if it's not rush hour, you can park where it says no parking. That is not available in most other municipalities in Ontario. That you don't have to put money in the on-street meters, you don't need on-street permits. My sister's house, you need an on-street permit, and there's no time limits. And this is done to be fair to people and to help people and to show compassion for people who have mobility challenges. But unfortunately, other people in the community see this as an opportunity to either get away without paying or to somehow circumvent the time limits that are placed there. We also have a lot of challenges in terms of public awareness and education. So I would really like to see, we always talk about kids in school being made aware of what it means to have accessible parking and permits, because I have a feeling that if we're teaching the kids that it's not right to use that permit when grandma's not in the car, those kids will speak up, and at least when they're in their car, I'm betting that their parents aren't going to dare do it, because parents, we all know, do behave better in front of children. So maybe we have to get through to the kids and get them speaking and letting people know that it's not appropriate, that if you see somebody who parks in handicap parking, to say something, well, you don't look like you have mobility challenges, or I don't see a wheelchair. That's not the public's place to make those kind of nasty comments. We hear that way too often. People can have challenges that might not be visible to us, and but we can see where that's coming from, Madam Speaker, because too many people know of fraud with the accessibility permits and accessibility parking. So when they see somebody who they don't know, or they don't see a wheelchair, they assume it's fraud. Well, that's where we know we have a big problem here, is if people see somebody parking in accessible parking and assume that there's some kind of fraud going on. And maybe there is. But we don't want the public to feel that there's some kind of scam that they should be trying to get on. We want to nip this in the bud. We want to make sure that going forward that people are treated respectfully and those spots are for where they're supposed to go. I want to just read a couple of comments that I was given by people in terms of their challenges, Madam Speaker, in terms of what they face. One is from Wendy Murphy herself, who is here. Confined to a wheelchair following a car accident in 1984, I've been around the disabled parking permit issue since its inception back in the early 1980s, and I'm saddened to see where it seems to have lost its initial purpose. Easy access becomes paramount when trying to maintain independence while in a wheelchair, most importantly when going about daily routines while driving. Close access to the entrance of public buildings is what the disabled parking permit was initially designed to offer those using wheelchairs. Today, the designated parking spots have often lost their size and dimensions and their availability. These frustrations are escalated when weather conditions are difficult, such as winter. And I think that that's what we need to get through to developers and the municipalities, who are giving the developers permission now very often to not put in as many parking spots. They're seeing higher density, maybe there's transit going in the area, but if accessible parking is a percentage of the parking spots, then those numbers of accessible parking go down if we allow developers and redevelopment of existing infrastructure to somehow have less parking and then somehow have less accessible parking. Maybe those ratios have to be adjusted and changed along the way. I want to just mention quickly from the March of Dimes, Stephen Christian sent also a comment. As someone living with post-polio syndrome, I need to use a car for transportation because if I overwork my muscles, the nerve damage in my legs increases. He runs a business, and his life revolves around worrying about parking and looking for parking. And that's really disturbing, Madam Speaker. And he talks about the area of Kingston where he feels that accessible parking is being greatly diminished in his community, and he's frustrated, and I certainly don't blame him, and I don't think anybody here blames him. I just want to mention that I've been offered a challenge, and I'm rising up to the challenge, which is, it's called the Wheelchair Challenge, and it's taking place this year on September 18th, and people can maybe somebody here wants to join my team. 6 people can be on the team. And what they've done is, it's so interesting because I think a lot of us remember when Mayor John Tory took the challenge and spent a day in a wheelchair. Well, the feedback they got from getting a few people to do that, this is through the Spinal Cord Injury of Ontario, the feedback they got is it was just too difficult. It was just too difficult to be in the wheelchair all day, and you can certainly see why, because maybe our homes and our offices aren't set up for us just for that day. So what they've done is they've made it fun, and they're having a carnival, and they're having teams, and you get to get the idea of what it's like to be in that wheelchair, but in a fun sort of atmosphere, and it's a fun challenge, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of great food, and they mentioned lots of great games as well. So I'm taking the challenge, and I'm asking everybody else to join me, and also our federal colleagues, MPs, if they also want to join the challenge and to create some teams. And this event can build momentum and to maybe also bring those kids out to educate them. And I think that a lot of times kids think it would be fun to be in that wheelchair. Well, if a child has an opportunity to be in a wheelchair, I think you should give them that opportunity. I don't think that the person feels disrespected whose wheelchair it is. I think that they welcome us to take a turn in their wheelchair and see how difficult it is to maneuver. So I'm looking forward to everybody's comments, and I'm hoping that we can get this to committee to have that discussion, how to streamline and how to prevent fraud. Thank you very much.